In January 2020, just before the world began unraveling from a global pandemic, I was stationed at a decommissioned military installation in upstate New York called Fort Nolan. Officially, it was labeled a training support site, but unofficially it had become something of a dumping ground for soldiers deemed non-essential to active operations. That's where I ended up. Half punishment, half reassignment after a disciplinary hearing involving an off-the-books drone operation overseas. Fort Nolan was quiet, surrounded by thick pine forests and isolated hills, with only a skeleton crew of about 15 personnel manning the facility. No civilians, no nearby towns, just trees and snow and silence. The barracks were a single L-shaped building with peeling beige paint and a heating system that groaned like something in pain. I was given room 2A, which used to be part of the officers' quarters. There was nothing particularly special about it, except for the ancient mirror mounted on the far wall. You couldn't remove it, it was bolted in. The glass had a faint discoloration at the center, like something had seeped through the silver backing. First night I noticed it, I thought maybe someone had spilled coffee behind the glass at some point, but over the next few weeks that stain shifted subtly, not grew, shifted as if it were watching. It was during the third week that things began to unravel. I woke up to the sound of my own voice echoing through the room, only I hadn't spoken. I was alone, lying in bed, and the room was completely dark. No lights from the hallway, no sound of the heating vents, just pitch black and my voice. But warped, slurred, like I was underwater. I turned to the mirror and saw, not my reflection, but the back of my own head. It stared at me for 3 full seconds before fading into the black. I didn't sleep the next night or the one after. I told Sergeant Caldwell, our CO, what I'd experienced, and he stared at me a moment longer than he should have, then said, "It's just the silence. Gets into your head," but he never asked which room I was in. It was like he already knew. I started hearing noises at night, whispers that came from the heating ducts but carried no wind, no airflow. My name spoken slowly, always from behind me. I'd sit in bed and hear someone breathing right at my neck, but when I turned, nothing. Just that stained mirror, darker each time. I moved into the rec room one night with my cot, told myself I was being paranoid. But even there, the silence felt wrong, like the base itself was holding its breath. One night, I caught another soldier, Marks, sitting alone in the kitchen at 3 a.m., eyes wide, staring at nothing. I asked what he was doing. He said he was waiting for the mirror to let her out. I thought he was kidding until he smashed a glass against the wall and ran back to his room. He was discharged the next day. No one said why. Things escalated quickly. Equipment started failing. Radios would broadcast garbled voices even when turned off. One soldier saw his reflection in the mess hall window blink when he didn't. Another claimed to see someone standing behind him in every reflective surface. Metal trays, spoons, even the water fountain. It was always the same figure, dressed in fatigues but with no face, just smooth skin where the eyes and mouth should be. The whispers became louder, less like echoes and more like commands. I started waking up with bruises on my back, symmetrical like fingers had pressed into me as I slept. One night I snapped. I covered the mirror in room 2A with a thick blanket and taped over the edges. When I returned from a patrol shift the next morning, the blanket was folded neatly on the floor and the mirror was clean. No stain, no discoloration. But now the reflection wasn't quite right. When I lifted my arm, the figure in the mirror hesitated before copying me. Just for a moment, enough to know I was no longer alone. I tried to report it through the chain, but each call I made from the comms room played back my own voice, pre-recorded, as if the response was scripted. One message came through in a male voice I didn't recognize. "Stay inside the mirror. Do not let yourself out." That same day, Caldwell called an emergency lockdown. He said it was a training simulation, but he never left his office again. 3 days later, the generator blew out. Lights off, no heat. Just snow and that mirror, always there, watching. It ended, or at least paused, when I smashed the glass with a fire extinguisher. The moment the mirror cracked, I swear something screeched from inside the wall. Not a sound of glass or shattering metal. Something alive. Something angry. The room shook. The air turned freezing and the lights flickered back on like someone had flipped a switch. When the other soldiers checked the room, there was no broken glass. The mirror was whole again, pristine. The next day I was discharged. They said my services were no longer needed. I signed a release form that had no header, no signature line, just a line of red ink at the bottom that said, "You are still inside." Since returning home, I haven't been able to find Fort Nolan on any map. It's not listed on government records or satellite databases. It's like it was erased. But sometimes when I look into any mirror, my bathroom, my car, even my phone screen, I don't see myself blink right away. There's a pause, like something else is remembering how to move. And once, just once, I caught a glimpse of my reflection smiling when I wasn't. In September 2018, I was temporarily assigned to Renshaw Base in Nevada for a 2-week joint communication systems training. Renshaw wasn't widely known, even among military circles. It sat out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, roughly 30 miles from any town, tucked behind layers of fencing and old airstrips that hadn't seen planes in decades. The assignment was last minute, and when I arrived, the air already felt wrong. Not just desert dry, but stale, like the whole facility had been holding its breath for a long time. I was housed in what they called Barracks C, an old concrete building that creaked more than it should have. There were only a handful of us there, mostly tech support personnel and one intelligence officer who kept to himself. The first night I found a laminated notice pinned inside my locker. No name, no stamp, no date, just 6 words typed in red ink. Do not enter the red room, ever. I thought it was a joke or hazing, so I laughed it off. But when I asked one of the base guards, he immediately turned pale and muttered something about old stuff that doesn't die easy. I didn't hear anything more about it until the 3rd night, when the power went out during a sandstorm. The backup generator kicked in, but everything flickered strangely, like the lights weren't just dimming, but pulling shadows from the corners of the room. One of the doors down the main hallway clicked open on its own. That door had been locked and sealed since I arrived, with a faded authorized personnel only sign barely clinging to it. The hinges groaned as it opened wide, revealing a dark hallway with red-painted walls. It didn't match the rest of the facility's layout. I'd seen the blueprints. That section wasn't supposed to exist. I stood at the threshold, feeling my gut churn when the lights behind me flicked off completely. I heard something faint then, a low, vibrating hum like machinery deep underground. I should have turned back, but something in me pushed forward, a curiosity that didn't feel entirely mine. The hallway swallowed sound. Even my boots felt muted against the tile floor. As I walked further, I passed rooms on either side. Each was numbered with white paint, and each door was slightly ajar. Inside, there were old radios, decomposing office chairs, and stacks of VHS tapes labeled with dates spanning from the 1960s to the 1980s. One label caught my eye. Subject number 041, reflection breach. I reached the end of the hallway, where a large steel door loomed with a rusted wheel lock in its center. A keypad blinked faintly beneath it. Strangely, the code was already entered. The green light was on. I opened it, half expecting to find storage or maybe a forgotten lab, but what I stepped into was a room bathed in deep, unnatural red. No visible light source, just a suffocating red glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The air was thick, static-charged, and cold in a way that didn't match the desert outside. At the center of the room was a single chair bolted to the floor. A cracked, black-and-white monitor sat on a rolling table facing it. The screen was on, but all it showed was static. I turned to leave, but the door slammed behind me. The wheel lock spun itself shut with a clang that echoed like thunder. That's when the screen changed. At first, I thought it was showing a recording. Grainy footage of someone in a military uniform sitting in the same chair, face buried in their hands. But as I watched, the figure lifted their head and my blood froze. It was me. Same uniform, same expression, but the eyes were wrong. Completely black, voids with something writhing just behind them. Then my radio crackled, not with static, but with my own voice. Only it wasn't saying anything I remembered speaking. It was whispering coordinates, followed by a warning. "They live behind the mirrors! Don't look into their eyes!" The room began to shake. The red intensified until I could barely see. I stumbled backward and hit something solid, except there had been no wall there a moment ago. The monitor showed dozens of faces now, all of them mine. All of them screaming in silence. Something unseen brushed my arm, cold, dry fingers that left a burning mark, and then nothing. I woke up the next morning outside the barracks, face down in the sand. My uniform was soaked in sweat, and there was blood dried around my nose. The red room door was locked again, its keypad dead. The hallway that had led to it no longer existed. Where it had been was just a blank, seamless concrete wall. I didn't report what I saw. I didn't mention the coordinates or the whispers or the fact that Even after I got back home, I kept dreaming in red. I visited a military therapist who said I might have had a heat-induced hallucination, but the mark on my arm never faded. A perfectly round, burned impression of what looks like an old camera shutter. To this day, any time I see red emergency lights or the flicker of static on an old screen, I feel something awaken inside me, something waiting. Because I don't think the Red Room was a place. I think it was a copy of me looking for a way out. And I think one day soon, it's going to take my place. In October 2015, I was stationed at Kessler Ridge, a remote underground radar and communications facility carved into the base of a mountain in Colorado. The place was old, originally constructed during the Cold War, and it felt like it had been buried under layers of silence ever since. The walls were so thick and insulated that once inside you couldn't hear the wind, the thunder, or even your own breath unless you focused hard enough. I'd been rotated there for a 6-week systems upgrade, mostly alone during the night shift, overseeing surveillance logs and signal monitoring. Kessler Ridge had a lot of rumors attached to it, stories about unauthorized transmissions picked up over the years, strange voices that weren't human, even a classified incident where a man reportedly walked into the elevator shaft despite the doors being closed. I always chalked it up to isolation paranoia. The base was deep enough underground to make anyone feel disconnected from the world. That was until I started hearing the voices myself. The oddity began on my second week during a routine diagnostics check. The comm system lit up with an inbound frequency ping. That wasn't supposed to happen. Kessler wasn't designed to receive on that channel. The signal came from inside the mountain, from coordinates that mapped directly beneath our floor by at least 300 feet, well past the known basement level. The voice was faint but unmistakably human. It didn't speak in sentences, it cried, it begged. But the strangest part was that it sounded exactly like my own voice. I ran a full trace on the signal. It showed nothing, just an empty loop with no origin. But every time I tried to shut it off, it pulsed back stronger. The third night, it said something different. I'm still down here. I played the recording for one of the engineers and she turned white. She said she'd heard the same thing years ago during a brief assignment at Kessler. She thought she was losing her mind. She transferred out a week later without notice. My commanding officer dismissed it all, claiming echoes in layered concrete could distort sound, and the mountain sometimes rebounded old recordings. That might have made sense if the voice hadn't started calling me by name. Then the lights began to flicker at 3:33 a.m. every night, exactly 3:33. No power surges, no system logs, just a deep electrical hum that shook my chair and made the screens go dark for exactly 13 seconds. One night, I decided to follow the signal. I overrode the elevator lock and forced it to stop on a level listed as sub-beta. There was no sub-beta, at least not in any documentation I'd seen. When the doors opened, I expected blackness, but instead I stepped into a hallway lined with old CRT monitors and empty gurneys pushed against the walls. The air was heavy, like I'd stepped into a pressure chamber. The only light came from flickering red panels on the ceiling, and the hum was louder than ever. I kept walking, counting my steps. Around 50 feet in, the hallway opened into a domed room with a floor made of metal grates and a single chair sitting at its center. I walked toward it cautiously, and that's when I heard the voice again. But this time, it wasn't over the radio. It was behind me. When I turned around, there was someone standing in the shadows. I couldn't see a face, but the shape, the posture, the uniform, it was me. Down to the smallest detail. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there. I reached for my flashlight, and in that split second the thing sprinted toward me, but its footsteps made no sound. I stumbled back and fell, slamming my head into one of the grates. I woke up hours later in the operations room, slumped in my chair. A low-level tech was shaking me awake, saying I'd triggered an alert by going radio silent for nearly 4 hours, but the elevator logs showed no override, no descent. The hallway I'd found was sealed behind reinforced steel welded shut decades ago, according to old construction reports. For the next week, I kept hearing whispers, not just in the comms, but in the pipes, in the vents, in the static between surveillance channels. Sometimes I'd hear my own conversations played back to me hours before I'd even had them. I stopped sleeping. I started drawing the room, the chair, the other me, over and over without even realizing. When my rotation ended, I asked around. A former base commander finally told me that Sub-Beta was an abandoned psychological warfare experiment, something about resonance chambers, soundscapes that could fracture identity, voices replayed so convincingly they broke minds. They shut it down after too many splits. I didn't ask what he meant by splits. I didn't want to know. But before I left, I took one final look at the system logs. Buried deep in the internal storage, there was a single image, a black and white freeze frame from one of the old cameras. It was me, sitting in that chair. But my eyes were rolled back, mouth open in a silent scream. My hands were bound to the arms of the chair, and behind me, in the reflection of a flickering panel, was another version of me, smiling. I don't know who walked out of Kessler Ridge that day. Me, or the thing that replaced me when the signal stopped. And that wraps up our dive into these chilling true military base horror stories. If you felt the tension, the fear, and the goosebumps, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real nightmare fuel. And hey, hit that bell icon so you never miss the next creepy drop.